Hello everybody, I hope that you are having a nice day and that your study is going well. I am obviously in a little bit of a different location today, but I'm just trying to mix things up and keep them fun and also just find empty classrooms that I can film in. So in the form that I sent out at the beginning of the week, I asked for what areas you were wanting some extra support with or what kinds of things you wanted to be spending more time on. And lots of people said aesthetic features and stylistic devices. So I thought I'd put together a quick video to give you some tips and some tricks to help you to remember to use those, but also just to remind you how well you know these, because you know them super duper well. Now, we know that a big part of our EAMG is based around the writer's choices. So that's why when we unpack a question, we always want to look for the verb that shows what the writer or the author is doing, because that is the choices that they are making. Now, obviously in our case, this is Hannah Kent. So we want to look at Hannah Kent's choices that she made when writing burial rites. And those are our aesthetic features and stylistic devices. There are a million aesthetic features and stylistic devices, and if I were to go over every single one of them in the novel with you today, this would be a 3-hour long video, maybe even longer. So instead, what I've decided to do is give you a resource that's going to help you to remember some of them, and then I'm hoping that this will enable you to remember the ones that you need. So this isn't a definitive list in any way, shape or form. It doesn't even have some of my favorites on there, but if you can remember this, you've got something. All right, pop quiz. What is the cognitive verb that you are going to be asked to do in this exam? Analyze. What does the A in petal stand for? Analyze. So we know that in the exam, we're definitely going to know the word analyze, okay? That's a word that we already know. We know we have to do. We're probably gonna write it down. It might even be the question. So if I were to give you the acronym analyze, that's a word that you're going to be able to remember. It's not one new thing to try and remember as well, but also in order to analyze in a discerning, effective, authoritative way that we need to be doing, we need to mention our aesthetic features and stylistic devices because we have to analyze the writer's choices. So I present to you, analyze. I've used bright colors on this and that's not something I normally do. I'm just trying something new out. But my acronym here is analyze. The acronym ANALYSE gives us some devices that are pretty universal. So regardless of what the question is or what it is we're trying to do, if we use these or we remember these, we're going to be set up for success. So the first A, illusion, and in parentheses I've got biblical. Now my reasoning for that is there are other types of illusion, absolutely, but I know I can confidently talk about biblical illusion, and I also know all of you can as well. So some examples of biblical illusion that I've got just on this sheet, but obviously there are so many more out there. He expected me to weep at his feet, as though I am a piece of bread and they are all taking communion of me, and I will bite the hand that feeds me, that refuses to love me, that leaves me. So we know that a biblical illusion is when the Bible is alluded to. We know that within burial rites, our characters are for the most part of the Lutheran faith, so they have knowledge of the Bible. And by using biblical illusion, Kent is reminding us of this, but also constructing some semblance of irony in that we know our characters don't exactly act in accordance to Christianity, but rather they misconstrue it for their own benefit. And by that I obviously mean people like Bjondel. But biblical illusion is paramount in the text, and even in when Agnes is just about to be executed, spoiler alert, and I'm just kidding, I really hope you know that by now. And she is essentially saying goodbye to all of the members of the family from Cornsar and Toady, and she likens herself to communion. That is so significant because we know that communion is the body of Christ. So she is likening herself to that of Jesus, which is somewhat significant, I would say. Obviously, really showing a difference in how she's valuing herself and so forth. For the N, I've decided to make it narrative structure, and then in parentheses I've got fragmented. Now my reasoning for this is because the narrative structure of the novel is of course fragmented, and that is so integral. And you could write an entire essay on this. In fact, it has been a question in the past, or it was a practice question, or there's a question out there somewhere about how Hannah Kent's narration choices impact the text, but it is a fragmented, non-linear narrative. There's stream of conscious in there. There's all of these things that very much construct a lot of the concepts a lot of the identities, the positioning of the audience is so significant through this fragmented narrative structure. All of the flashbacks, this is all included within the fragmented narrative structure. Now, what's really important is that when we talk about narrative structure and when we talk about any of our devices, we have to actually give the example, or we have to actually explicitly say when this occurs. Now, in the instance of a biblical allusion, you would probably provide a quote, but for narrative structure, you can't provide one quote that shows that it's fragmented. So you wouldn't say, through Kent's use of a narrative structure, audiences are positioned to. You would need to say, through Kent's use of a fragmented narrative structure, when something occurs. So make sure, whilst it's not a quote, it's that explicit reference to a part of the text so that you can really be analyzing it. So obviously the most paramount example of the narrative structure rather being incredibly fragmented is moments before Agnes's execution, when we just have stream of consciousness. It's nonsensical. We've got Agnes thinking that ravens are in the water and she's in the water and nothing's making sense. That is so important because that shows us just how Agnes is feeling, and we really get a taste, or a feel rather, of what's going through her mind. And that wouldn't be possible if the narrative wasn't fragmented. The second A is one of my favorite, and that is animalistic metaphor. Now, we know that if we forget to call it an animalistic metaphor and we just call it a metaphor, that's okay. But by referring to these animalistic metaphors, we're able to be a little more authoritative in our analysis. And one reason why I really love animalistic metaphors in the text is because they link to one another. There's a little bit of parallelism there. And if there was a P in the word analyze, perhaps I might mention parallelism. But Agnes refers to herself as a lamb, but Margaret refers to her as a lamb as well. So my first quote that I've got down here is it necessary to keep her bound like a lamb ripe for slaughter? So Margaret says that about Agnes at the very beginning, really showing us that whilst we see this massive growth in character from her, she's always had that nurturing value within. Agnes later refers to herself as a lamb ripe for slaughter. So we see that connection between the two. Agnes says that she's been in the killing pen for months, again likening herself to an animal, really highlighting that notion of time, waiting, the lack of humanity she's provided. And then finally, the example I've got here is, so lonely I make friends with the ravens that prey on lambs. I love this one because it brings in a bit of symbolism, which we'll talk about in a second. So we have, obviously the ravens are such a significant symbol in the text. So it brings that in, but brings us back to the lamb. And we know that Agnes is incredibly lonely, and we know that she wants to belong. And that's showing us, this quote is showing us this, but she's so lonely that she's making friends with death. And that death preys on lambs. And we know that she's already referred to herself as a lamb. And if we look at what a lamb might symbolize or be a metaphor for, lambs are young, they are naive, picture a lamb right now, you're picturing something that's quite small and cute and harmless. So when we say a lamb to slaughter, that's quite grotesque, really. We're going to have a bit of an emotional reaction to that. So what we're saying here is that she is this lamb, and she's becoming friends with the death that preys on her. So it's almost like she is so lonely that she is accepting her fate and she is welcoming death. And that's incredibly sad. And it really shows the inner turmoil that Agnes has. So a really great quote and a really great example of an animalistic metaphor. For L, I've got lexical choice. Now, lexical choice is a great one so long as we are actually using it properly. So if we refer to Kent's use of lexical choice, we need to make sure we say what that lexical choice was. So we know that lexical choice is like word choice, right? So one of my examples here is when Kent includes the line from Margaret to Agnes that is, my girl, my girl. And you can see here that I've underlined the word. I've underlined the word my because that's the lexical choice. Because by choosing to include this word that implies ownership, it shows that Margaret is taking responsibility for Agnes, and she is saying that she is hers. And what better way to signify the extent to which Agnes gains family and love and belonging and connection from Margaret, that maternal instinct that we know she has. So by saying my girl, there's a clear choice that's made. Similarly, we've got murderess. We've got you are not, and then I've underlined you are not a monster. And just make sure the word I'm definitely not going to say on the internet stays away from the knives. These are all really good examples of lexical choice, but that underlined word is the word that I would analyze. So Margaret goes from calling Agnes a swear word to calling her my girl, and that lexical choice really represents the growth of their connection. Now for the letter Y, I've chosen to not make it a device, but rather make it a reminder. Why? So remember to answer the how and why. So when we talk about any of these devices, we need to make sure we are in an authoritative way stating how and why they prove my thesis, of course, but also how and why they are the writer's choices, how and why they position the audience, what is the effect. The word in the EAMGs that we've looked at looks at the effect of the aesthetic features and stylistic devices. So this positions the audience to empathize with Agnes. This leaves readers seeing Nathan in a new light. This further exemplifies the extent to which Toti just wants to help Agnes. So we're going that little bit further. So when we're writing this acronym down, when we get to the letter Y, let's make it a little note to ourselves. Why? Why am I going to talk about these? Why are they there? Why has the writer made that choice? The second last letter is S, so symbolism. There are so many symbols in the text, and I am not going to talk about all of these in my essay because I would not have the time, and again, I need to really explain how and why they are important and why they are a symbol, and of course, what they symbolize. So we've got the brooch, and I love this symbol because it is only mentioned, I think, twice, maybe 3 times in the text, but because it's at the beginning and the end, it symbolizes Agnes's, again, belonging, but it symbolizes the growth of so many characters, and if my question asks me to talk about anything to do with that, the brooch is going to be a great example there. It's also, to some extent, a bit of a biblical allusion. Maybe that's a bit of a reach, but it's the symbolism is biblical in nature because the brooch was given to the sister at Cornsa for her communion, so that's important there. We have the stones, so we obviously have stones mentioned quite a few times in the text. When Agnes's mother abandoned her, she was left with nothing but a stone. When she is about to be executed, she spits out the stone. We have the ocean. I was going to write body of water because it's not always an ocean. We also have, like, he knows me like he knows the seasons, knows the tide. We have death waves. It's as though we are all underwater. So there's a lot of water-based metaphors. We've obviously got the ravens. We know they symbolize death. Agnes's clothing when it's burnt off at the start by Margaret, obviously symbolizing her past being burnt off, her something being destroyed. We've got the landscape and the weather, we've got light. There's lots of mentions of light and candles and flames all throughout the text. We've obviously got that quote that I love at the very beginning when Agnes sees light after she's been in Storyborg, and she says, I could have wept from the relief of light. But then we also have the flame going out at Inga's house, Agnes's foster mum, and lots of other mentions of light all throughout. And of course we've got dreams. So lots of symbols in the text, and if I've got that letter S there, I might be prompted to remember that. Finally, for E, I was gonna make the E stand for emotive language, but I decided to make it stand for epigraph. Now, my reason for that is because I think that this could be used for almost any question, but also it's a form of foreshadowing. So it's almost like a, pardon my pun, 2 ravens, 1 stone kind of situation, because it shows us what's to come. And lots of us have expressed that we're a little bit nervous about a saga's question. We shouldn't be. A saga's question would be great and you would be amazing at it. But this is from a saga. So I was worse to the one I loved best. You don't need to remember the name of this saga, okay? Because it's not in English and that might cause us to be a little extra nervous. If you want to memorize it, live your truth. But by knowing that the novel starts with this excerpt, it's also an allusion to the saga, but this excerpt from this saga, I was worst to the one I loved best, it foreshadows what's to come in the text on so many different levels. So that's what I've decided the E is going to stand for. So hopefully that was helpful. I have uploaded that sheet to Teams. I also have heaps printed out here at school, so if you are here by chance over the next 2 days, or as I said on Teams, if you have a sibling or a neighbour or just somebody that you know is going to see you between now and the exam, come and get a hard copy from me. Otherwise, that digital one is there for you. All the best. Reach out if you need anything. Bye.